What? Summer's left. So, hello everyone and welcome to our meetup, the future of data management. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Rafael Hofer. I'm a software architect at Accenture. And today we will talk about a little bit about the area of the future of data management. We will cover a lot of topics of this area in this call today. Let us start with the introduction of our speakers. Patrick, tell us something about yourself, please.
Thank you. My name is Patrick Berger. I'm calling in from Mattighofen in Upper Austria, and I'm head of master data governance at KDMAG. We are Europe's largest producer of motorcycles and power two-wheelers, as we call it. Yeah, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks. Peter.
Yeah. Hi, so my name is Peter Jaschke. I'm also architect with Accenture now already for 8 years. I'm specialized in data architectures and backend architectures and big data and everything that's connected with it. Also, how to do this stuff in the cloud. And yeah, I'm here today to talk about data.
Cool. Thank you. Philip.
Hello, I'm Philip Eigner. I'm also a data architect and data engineer, also now working nearly 4 years for Accenture. Usually involved in big data transformations, data warehouses, data lakes, and so on, building huge data platforms. And in my free time, this means I have to get a lot of steam off my chest. So I'm interested in everything with speed. So I'm riding a motorcycle, going free skiing, or even riding the bicycle downhill somewhere. So yeah, that's basically me. So let's hand over to Ralf then, the last one in our round.
Yeah, hello, Ralf Babitz is my name. I'm working also for Accenture, like the most of the crowds in here today. I'm working as technology specialist or technology consultant, which means I'm getting paid for asking the stupid questions and noting it somehow down. And in my private life, or in the last 2 weeks, spent a lot of time in following up the European Championships in soccer. So it's busy days these days.
Cool. So thank you for your introduction. Before we start into our today's topic, I would like to introduce the sponsor, and maybe some people of you guessed, it's Accenture. They're helping us with the costs of their Meetup page, and they are a global consulting company with a focus on technology, and they are currently seeking for 2 roles, and even more if you visit their webpage. The first one is Senior Data Architect, and the second one is Data Engineer and Big Data Analyst. So, now let's talk about the future of data management. Maybe let's start with the first question of our evening. And before we start into our first question of the evening, Philip, you want to introduce what is a data mesh?
Yeah, basically, let me share my screen. I mean, it wouldn't be a consulting company presentation if there wouldn't be any PowerPoint slides. So, but I'm a techie guy, so I limited to what is actually needed. So basically we have 2 major topics. So we have the topic, the data lake. So if we talk about a data lake or data management in general, we always have to think from data source up to the data consumption and everything in between. So this also means that we have to address things like the data management itself, intelligent governance, security, self-service, things and topics that we need to consider. So basically, if we start here from the beginning, it will be quite similar for the data mesh. So that's why on the data mesh, we didn't really focusing what is a data mesh, but here we just have this classical view. So on the capture side, we usually have had in the beginning, we have the databases, the files, the huge batch loads and all of the things. This now changed dramatically over the last 2 years. We bringing in third parties. Now we are APIs. We have now the whole IoT and devices and sensor topic that gets involved in this, and also we have the as data sources, also other cloud services and so on. And this means on the data acquisition side, we not have to deal only with bulk or batch approaches. We have to deal with streamings. We have to deal with APIs. And we still have change data capture. We still have the file copy things. Yeah. So this in general means on the acquisition side, these are the legacy stuff that is usually there. So okay, I don't have an audio on my. Okay, just will continue, which then usually means we load this data somewhat in our data lake. We usually have this in the raw zone, which means plain as it is. Then we have a curated zone, which has some little integration of data, bringing data together, doing some cleansing, linking it, as already mentioned, and standardized things like the format of dates, formats of timestamps and things like that. Yeah, addresses, all you can imagine. Then usually some companies or industries have a unified data model. Yeah, so this is getting then transformed. For example, if you know the telco sector has the ITOM-SIT data model, which is very pronounced and very strictly followed. So this is a way to bring this together. And then we have a published zone, as to say, where basically all people can connect and consume actually the data. We have there certain business rules, which means who can access which kind of data, and so on. Yeah. So, and then we have extra purposely built zones, so meaning like certain extract, which get then transferred to other systems, analytical data stores. So for example, we at the Accenture always experimenting with a so-called customer analytical record. This would be a perfect fit for such things. So having all kind of customer data in a specific analytical record store. Then clearly, as all of you know, there's this operational storage or operational database approach where you have for certain access or speed up processes, you have an additional database after the data lake actually. And then there's a discovery sandbox or time boxed environments. So for certain use cases where you want to explore, mostly on data science base, you basically have these kind of environments. Yeah. So this is the purpose zone, and then how you access this, you can access it via files, SQL queries. Don't really have to go into details, I think there. And no surprise, at the data consumption side, you see a lot of actually past or legacy familiar things like the BI and reporting, things like ClickView, Power BI, the usual Cognos reports and things like that. But there are also new players to the game. So there's the machine learning side, there's the ad hoc analysis, there are the input application. So it's not only a one-way street anymore. It's also getting fed basically back to the application. So think about you calculate a very complicated churn score or some customer value proposition. You want to bring this back basically to your CRM system and use it on a daily basis. Yeah, and again, that's applications and third party. It's a little bit double in terms of input there. And of course, as already mentioned before, only very briefly, this data management, so meaning like the metadata management, data lineage tracing, data quality, reference, and master data management. These are all things that usually get a little bit thrown under the bus, or not considered often too much, and this is really hurting you on a daily basis, and especially if you want to get value out of your data. And of course, a topic that's not the favorite of anybody, but it is quite important in an enterprise environment. It's the topic security and common services. So identity and access management, data protection, the DevOps patterns basically, and all of this stuff. So basically, this is all we're gonna maybe hopefully tackle today and give you some answers, and can hopefully find a lot of questions to all of this. Regarding this zone model here, a little bit more in detail. I mean, we already tackled it. So basically, landing means putting the data as raw as it is. Raw zone is combining basically most of the time some streaming and batch data. Also, there are minimal modification not too much transformation. Then usually we have this standardized zone where we really just doing a data cleansing, bringing things up to standards, checking data quality, no transformations here. And then, so this is usually also typically where data analysts start to access the data. Whereas, for example, we see here down this data exploration, data discovery. So the whole zones, this is usually the field of data scientists. They most likely want the data as raw as possible. So that's why you even have things like a raw zone or a landing that they can check this. And then usually, as mentioned before, transformed zone. This is the big zone where you build these enterprise data models and all of these things. Your data marts or maybe the data mesh afterwards. We'll have a look onto that. And this is where you usually still find only the data analysts, and then this published zone where everything is nice, decorated and curated so they can access it with their self-service tools like Tableau and Power BI or Click, or they have the final reports in some IBM Cognos or something like this. So this is where this all is happening. Good. So any questions already to the data lake or anything to that?
I didn't see comments in the section, so it seems fine for now.
Okay, good. Then let's bring on the new player to the table. So I mean, this all looks good, but it all looks like a little bit old and stale. We have the same principle with staging and everything. We had it all in the data warehouse already, where we also had the staging layer. Then we have, as you remember, the ETL pattern. We have the extract, the transform, and the load. And all of this. But it's a little bit, it's not really fitting how product teams are set up in large enterprise organizations, how the microservice pattern is looking like. So you basically, what you see a lot of the time is like you have this fancy new enterprise architecture, and that on the side you have a small strip which is called BI and analytics as an afterthought on the side. So basically the data mesh tries to challenge this. So in order to bring the microservice pattern, the product thinking focus into this whole universe, basically. So what is the data mesh? So data mesh is basically a concept of interpreting the microservice pattern for data. So it means discoverable. So the data should be, so you usually integrate the data in a data catalog. You have dedicated ports, how this is, so the input and output ports and so on. So this is also mixed a little bit with the addressable. Trustworthy means it should be integrated in common quality reports and so on. So you can really trust on the data. And also it should be guaranteed that they are interoperable. So meaning the two major blocks. So we have the data domains, which is the larger portion, and then the data products within the data mesh. These can be chained together. They can really interwork with each other. So let's maybe dive a little bit deeper into the topic of a data domain. A data domain is basically something served by a common cross-functional team. What means that? It doesn't mean cross-functional that we say cross-functional through IT. It also means really cross-functional through the entire business, meaning that there are product managers in there. There are people who actually are data stewards and data owners from the business side who really know this data by heart and can help the data engineers and then the data scientists and so on to really bring in more value into this data. And also, for example, what could be a data domain? Data domain could be something like all about sales reporting, or like shop sales, or like, for example, everything around, if you take the example of a mobile network operator, everything related to devices and so on. And then you have your subdomains and then your data products in there, like fixed net devices or mobile devices, and what you have of kind of data products out of that. So what is usually a data product? A data product is basically a construct just of 3 actual ports, or more, at least 3, actual port. It has a control port, which basically is there for, as I mentioned, the catalog, also log management. You see, you can start and trigger things like the actual loading of this and trigger the actual pipeline. Then you have the input data ports. Input data ports means just, as we've seen before, in the data lake, you have to get your data from somewhere. So it can be input data from a Kafka stream, it can be some file, can be some database or whatever. An output data port, it basically means the same. So everything can be an output. It can be like a file that is put onto some storage. It can be some database that is filled. It can be some API. It can be everything. To give you this on a more visible, we said, okay, about the sales shop domain. So to make it quite changeable. So you have the data product, for example. There is a product manager, usually with the Vienna, for the Vienna shops, and he has in a team, they are creating this data product basically, creating together with some data engineers this product, which is basically producing, for example, some output file, and also providing some SQL queryable report, and this then can be chained together to some overall sales report, This is then a data product again, and this is again made queryable via SQL. So you say, okay, what does this really mean in real-time world or in a concrete example? So if you put here, for example, our components together. So for example, maybe these sales are put onto a file on a cloud storage. There is a own dedicated service user for this Vienna shop product. The metadata and everything is managed in the cloud data catalog. Then via data flow, there is a processing happening that is maybe aggregating this sales, or is processing out a report that is saying, okay, this and this dealer is the best one in the shop, basically. So having like a ranking and putting this to the file, to the storage, to the cloud storage. So this is then one output port. And the same is, for example, this data flow could also create some view that is then made accessible via BigQuery, that is doing some aggregations, basically telling by the opening hours which ones are the most, where's the revenue the highest, for example. And this thing could be used into an aggregated report where all of the exact same query, same output ports are then chained into a new report, and that is then the sales report data product, for example, that is again having the same, having also an input storage, having own dedicated service user, having writing his metadata and everything to the data catalog, keeping there also his lineage, and then is providing the output on BigQuery. And this then could be changed, for example, with another data domain. So this, I think it makes it a little bit more tangible what a data mesh is actually. So it's basically not something totally fancy and totally new, but it's really seeing data as a microservice. So this hopefully is familiar for a lot of you people. Good. Then I would say let's go into the discussion. My infusion session anyway took a little bit longer than expected. So
no worries. So thank you for the brief introduction into the topic of data mesh. So let's dive into the first question: data mesh versus data lake. When we're talking about data mesh now we have an kind of picture now how a data mesh should look like, right? So what's about the data lake? We have this technology used in varieties of companies seen out there, and it's used quite a long time now. So will be the data mesh something that we need to adapt, something that will replace the data lake? Let's talk about that. Peter, what's your opinion about that?
So I have the feeling that these are not mutually exclusive. They're like two things of a spectrum. So like if you really make it provocative, you could say a data lake is nothing like a data mesh with just one huge domain, and you do all the processing inside, and you offer one output there to be consumed. And I think so. I think with all these new systems flowing around, it's getting more and more specific to use cases, and for sure, data lakes and all the big Hadoop clusters and so on, they have their use cases where they work really well, and probably where you would have a big hassle if you would try to build it up in a data mesh, and probably also vice versa. So I think data mesh is not that far adapted yet, as far as I know. I haven't seen that huge processing engines, but I think I could imagine quite some good structures where a data mesh would fit quite better than a data lake, because a lot of people tend to just put a lot of structure inside a data lake, what is not really the sense of data lake, because you're trying to split it up. And as soon as you put a lot of governance into the data lake, maybe a data mesh would be more fitting for you. But if you really have like just if you really want the environment where you just need raw processing power, and you really can't afford any governance on top. For example, I had I think one of the best use cases really fitting for a data lake I ever heard is I think processing for oil drills, really huge data. They did one big data lake. They even removed all the security from the data lake and just did like a boundary around the data lake just to get this raw processing power to know as fast as possible when they hit hard rock to stop the drill. And I think these kinds of use cases are not doable in a data mesh, because of course if you do multiple zones, you always lose some processing power. But again, what you could think of is that this data lake would be maybe one domain in a bigger data mesh, right? So I'm not sure if it's a versus and more depends.
Thanks. Ralph, your opinion to the topic?
Oh well, yeah. As Peter already started being provocative, I would even get a little bit more about provocation in here. I would say it's. I think there's a correlation between having a kind of maturity on enterprise architecture in an organization, which tends to solve the problem a little bit more from the domain-driven approach, than with having somehow less maturity here, leading to sort out problems by adding storage or buying metal. Yeah, so that's I think also one of the things to look on that. But at the end, I would totally agree with Peter. That's very use case driven, and especially when you talk about large arrays of sensors who are producing a lot of raw data in a very short point of time. It's a brilliant idea to have a data lake, especially somehow in a public cloud hosted environment where you do not have to deal with all the ingress and all these bandwidth topics, and you just fill in everything you want to store and want to process further on. But as you said before, when you keep in mind what Philip said before, it's a lot about having data into classic boxes in the data lake. It's a lot about copying things from A to B, which typically tends to duplicate data or triple or multiply it by its own. So a lot of things like having a good governance, what is at the end the leading system, or where is the truth at the end, whatever that means, truth in data. That could be a nice question for a follow-up on enterprise architecture. Where is the single source of truth everyone is talking about over, I think, 35 years or even more? So I would rather say there is, on the one hand side, really a question about how mature is my enterprise architecture group, and am I able to have a kind of end-to-end view to my architecture, technical business domains, and data which is correlated to it, because a lot of organizations struggle with that. And the second question is, do I really have such a simple scenario where a data lake covers more or less everything I'm looking for? Yeah, and therefore I would take also the position of Peter. It's not a vice versa. Yeah, it's a part of, but yes, I would say that's the two things. And the last thing, from a cloud perspective, having a data lake these days is so easy and so cheap that a lot of IT organizations are quite happy just to pop up a data lake and say, look, we have a solution. Because it's a simple solution, having space and putting some data on it, and having someone else, like a data engineer, sorting it out and having some fun in bringing out some fancy dashboards. Yeah, so that's why it's at the moment hip and cool. From a midterm and maturity perspective, I'm a huge fan of data mesh, to be honest. But Philip, you had the most important slides for us. Yeah, maybe you can have a short answer to that.
Of course, I also don't see it as an either-or approach, and I also would go even as far as to say a data lake, as you mentioned. Yeah, this whole huge IoT use cases. I mean, you came across with oil drilling. We have a customer now who is actually processing huge amount of actually wind energy data and tries to therefore somehow stabilize his network based on this data. So to have this as a kind of input, so this could be an own data product. It is encapsulated. You have basically, because all of the parts that you have usually in such a data lake are actually also parts that you could consider in the data mesh, in a data product. Yeah, basically, you also have to take care of governance. You have to take care of the ingest, of the output, and all of this. So it can be actually a data product. So a data lake could be a data product in a data mesh. Yeah, so this is definitely the case. I mean, where this shines hugely is if you have, as mentioned before, an enterprise scenario where you have this really put out these agile teams in terms of like with product management, with shop data and all of this, and shop management and so on. If you bring these teams and they really know their data, but in the past they had this huge or always the huge drawback of like integrating vertically into enterprise-wide data model or even a data warehouse where you have to bring in data into a core model and so on. And now they have the benefit of really doing with the data what they think is the best, and then provide it via the output interfaces to somebody else. I think that's the key. And in a data lake, we tried to in the past to bring in this with this zone-based model, but it has clearly its limitations at some point, especially if you bring it into this huge enterprise data model, then all of a sudden it's not so easy anymore to do then the changes and so on. Good. I think Raphael.
Yeah.
Do we also
I
want to
think,
bring in the opinion from our guest from KTM?
of course. So please, what's your opinion?
Yeah, having no practical experience with the data mesh so far, but I've always been struggling over the last couple of years with the idea of throwing everything into one data lake and then trying to get something out of that is actually useful, because there's always domains coming in from a side where you wouldn't expect it, and you again have to bring that in, and you have to factor that in when you do your analytics. So I could imagine that, as you said, the data lake could be a part of the data mesh for topics where it's useful, where it can be used, and where it enables us to be more flexible with the changes that we're seeing all the time. So that's at least the hope that I have.
Raphael, you're on mute.
Sorry, the normal issue in the call, right? So we have one question currently in the comment section. I think it's for you. Will the slides or the video will be available, or should I be frantically taking some screenshots? The video will be available on YouTube afterwards. And Philip, you want to share the slides with the community, or?
Yeah, we can do so. No problem with that.
Cool, yeah. So I hope that answered your question. And then, so the thing I think about also about the data lake, I mean, data lake can be also just seen as a technology in some cases when we look at the products from Azure, right? It's just the base, maybe of one of the parts of the data mesh, as you all said. It's kind of technology. If you want to use it, it's very easy to implement, as also Ralph mentioned, and there's place for both. Yeah. So then to the next question. It's about event-driven and data-driven integrations. This topic is about how you actually change your data based on data or based on events, because this is a thing we're always discussing also with our customers currently is you want to go in this event-driven approaches these days. And the question is how you handle these, right? Because if you're living in this batch world where you have some ETL processes that are triggered in kind of a time frame every day, and maybe in an hour, or there's also a weekly job that runs. Is this the thing you want to drive by events these days, by streams? That's mostly done with, for instance, with Spark, Flink, or other tools. What's your opinion? Maybe let's start with Philip.
So, okay. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, especially if you're talking about event-driven architectures and so on, I'm now at a client who sees this quite differently. They use, for example, on a Kafka platform, they consume the whole Kafka topic once daily. So they created out of event-driven and message-based, basically an old batch system. So yeah, that's not really the purpose of it, and they really didn't get the benefit, because why you basically come to this, or what's the benefit of it nearly is especially this whole batch loads. Actually, everybody who has worked in a classical with a classical data warehouse is at one or another point came to the point where the nightly run, yeah, didn't finish at the morning, yeah, and then there is no actual data and so on, and you kind of avoid this basically if you work with an event-driven approach. You definitely have other challenges like where to make the daily split and things like that, and how to count correctly. But you also have these challenges in the old batch-oriented world. What's definitely a nice try, and also a nice add on the hyperscalers, for example, yeah, to work, for example, with Lambda functions and things like this, yeah, in order to process data. So basically, it eases up the field a little bit and gives you a lot of flexibility there. Yeah. So, but it always is the case. The question is it fitting your use case? Yeah. So it all boils usually within architecture down to get the use case right, and not trying to, because you're a fan of a certain architecture, trying to fit the use case to the architecture. It should never works out. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, maybe Peter has a totally other opinion. I'm not sure, but.
No, actually, I have exactly the same. So there is some benefits also to do this kind of creating events out of batch modes, just because it's so easy to distribute the data out from the queues. and getting it into the different services. And also so also it's like a good entry to all the streaming world, because if you already have set up all the infrastructure, it's very easy just to switch from single batch inputs and add some streaming input also, or just increase the the cycle, so switch from a daily cycle maybe to hourly or something like that. This is much easier if you're just creating events out of it. Yeah, but so I on the other hand, I'm also not a fan to go this full in event driven everything, because I'm pretty sure there is also very far in the future still a very big place for data driven integrations on and batch floats, because they are so if you don't need the data in real time, and you need to do big joins and big analytics stuff, you will be always depending on batch modes. So for me, it will be always be important to have both, and to have probably most of the data in the future will have to be available in event-driven platforms and real time, and also in batch platforms for big queries. For if we look at most of the complicated analytics use cases, there's no way to do it in real time, because they just take too long to process. So you will be always in a batch mode also in the future.
If I may just jump in there quickly, I also think it largely depends on the use cases that you have, because in some cases you might really not want your data to be real time or near time for some reporting purposes, for example, where you have in your data warehouse different reports that run towards the same sources, and you want it to show the same figures and not depending on the time of day where you ran it, you have differences there. There's also, in my opinion, some ways to go a little bit in between to avoid the purely scheduled batch mode by, for example, orchestrating it as you're waiting for one batch mode to finish until you start with the next one. But I totally agree that everything that where you have to be fast and where you have to bring information out into other systems quickly, event-driven is probably the way to go there.
So, thank you. I think Ralph, you already told us something about this topic.
Oh well, yes. I would say also it's a lot about what is the thing. I mean, yeah, and I needed to that was really like smiling so hard, living in a batch world, yeah. But yeah, at the end, when you take a look in reality, there is a lot of batch jobs running somewhere between midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning, and a lot of organizations are still heavily dependent on that. And I would say the guys from UC4 are still earning a lot of money on that business case or on that topic. I would say there are 2 or 3 things from the basic questions. Yeah, at the end, we will always. Every organization still do have a kind of core, yeah, and the core is mostly in the enterprise segment, and I don't want to even say it because I'm not a huge fan of it, but SAP. Sorry, guys out there, if you love it, yeah, there's a different history with me and SAP, but it's a difficult one. But at the end, there is a core, and there is, on the other hand side, if you're lucky, you have another product running your customer relationship management data, And if you're lucky, you have some service management tools in the cloud. And if you're further lucky, you do have the situation that you have an exogenic shock 18 months ago, and most of your traditional business is then running digital, and you need to scale like hell or like never before. And then you are really into huge pressure. Yeah. And then you're sitting more or less in the situation in between, which means every time when I need to extend these core environments, which all of the enterprises do have, I need to find a way of event-driven architecture. Otherwise, I cannot find a way to scale between the scalability needs and the flexibility of microservices and my huge monolithic core from the past. Yeah, and that's where Kafka or Kafka as a service, like Azure Event Hub or other stuff, is a beautiful solution. Yeah, and it was really nice to see that Kafka could be also a batch engine. That was new to me, but yeah, it makes sense. The thing here is, from my end, I think that makes the beauty of the situation of the last 18 months. So everyone had the situation that new services or even more digital services in the business sphere arrived, and therefore you need to extend, and therefore event-driven integration is more or less the easiest way to go to. Yeah. And when you think about those as a service components with their easy to use HTTPS interfaces and all that stuff, and the integrated security, blah blah blah, that's brilliant. Yeah. On the other hand side, there is still one of the major problems in all these data governance topics, and I do have the pleasure, for instance, to work for customers in an industry where you do have the regulatory need to split data from side A of the company, and it is not allowed to touch data of side B of the same company. Yeah. And therefore, all these things like data lakes, data-driven integration, etc., is always a huge drama, because you need to spend a lot of work to determine very precisely what kind of information is coming from what kind of batch job, from what kind of source, and touches each other on a storage, on a data lake, or wherever. Yeah, and so. From my personal gut feeling, and this is mainly out of the last 18 months, I would say the easiest way in integration these days is the event-driven approach. Yeah, and as long as you are not afraid about using public cloud, and as long as you are not afraid about also thinking about scalability and microservices in the same situation. Yeah.
So thank you.
So it sounds, So it sounds that we have a clear winner here, which is event-driven integration, isn't it?
Of course. I mean, to do something data-driven doesn't mean we should not create events out of it, right? As we say, we can always create from batch also events. So why not, during the data move, creating some technical events, right?
And actually, a lot of big banks are very good to fake real time out of their batch core banking systems.
Yes, they do.
They're very, very pretty looking front ends that have very, very old core backend batch modes. And nobody is in real time.
Peter, I'm pretty sure you're looking for the word reliable and trusted instead of old, isn't it?
Of course.
Yeah.
Mature, you usually say, oh?
Mature COBOL systems, yes.
Yeah.
like fine wine and cheese.
The good part is systems, they are pretty bulletproof of the last 30 to 40 years, right?
That's true.
So as long as they work.
As long as they run.
Yeah, of course.
Until somebody tells you to change something.
Oh, yeah, find a good junior developer in Cobalt, and that's the first task always, right? I mean, junior dev begins with 40 years in Cobalt, I think, right? I'm a bit too young for this. So, um, Albert joined the call currently. Maybe you introduce yourself as well.
Yes, for sure. Hello.
No.
I'm also with Accenture, and I'm heading our applied intelligence business. So this is the unit dealing with how to generate insights of all the data you are structuring, capturing, streaming, whatever. And therefore then the final thing, and yeah, capturing the insights and generating value for the companies from a business perspective, with a strong focus in data science and artificial intelligence, as I'm coming from the.
Oh, seems like the internet faded. Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That's a pity. Okay, maybe let's go on, and he will get back when he's back on track. So let's start with the next question, I think. So the future of a data warehouse. Oh, Albert, you're back. So back to the introduction.
Yeah, sorry, some connection issues. Not all
No
telcos
worries.
are evenly good in their stability of the connection.
I think the Corona year teaches us all how bad the internet can be. So maybe back to the introduction. I think you stopped at you were part of or head of the AI.
Exactly. Exactly. Head of AI, and also from the mathematical point of view, coming out of my studies, really we build a strong practice, and then starting with how to generate then the insights with artificial intelligence and other topics. And so I'm really interested because I think this is the hardest challenge, really this foundation and in data logistics, whatever the architecture is, to really be able to generate the incident and perform the models. Because I can say, even looking back from my data science days and even now with my colleagues, how much time a mathematical data scientist is captured with not doing the modeling and the mathematical modeling, but you're adjusting the data and processing the data. And so I'm really eager to hear solutions, how that can be reduce the work effort on that area.
I mean, I worked a lot with AI people back around this whole year, and it always was the same issue: where are the data? So the customer said he has the data, but where are they, right? And I hope we can find it out today. So maybe with the next question, the future of data warehouses. So when it comes to this topics we've discussed in this call already, like data mesh, data lake, and stuff, there's also a data warehouse. So is the data warehouse still taking place in the future, or will it be replaced by the technologies we mentioned before? Maybe somebody wants to start.
I mean, it looked a long time that the data lake will be the replacement of a data warehouse, yeah. But it's not really the case, because they are so you have to really go back which companies first were going into a data lake and what was their problem. Yeah, basically Google and Facebook and so on, they started the data lake because they had a huge amount of data that they want to actually analyze, and most of the stuff was unstructured data. As I mentioned, huge storage needs. Yeah, so alone how many thousands or millions or even, I don't know, billions images Facebook is currently analyzing on a daily basis, even if you look Instagram and so on. So they have a huge need for this. Yeah. But this comes at a cost, because it is built for a purpose. Yeah, it's built for storing data and not necessarily for fast access and so on. Yeah, and also compute there is not. It was not the first or main purpose. Yeah, And you see now with the uprising of SQL again, yeah, so SQL as a query language, yeah, not just on the classical databases. So you see it on various parts, yeah, like SQL for actually querying JSON structures and so on, yeah, or like Google BigQuery, yeah, where you have an SQL-like. It's not always 100% to the SQL standard, of course not, because Google wants to implement new features fast, so they don't wait until every 4 years some SQL standard is approved and then sort out. I mean, I remember when the SQL 99 standard was put in all major databases. So this is just a few years back, yeah, so to say. But as I said, yeah, in a specific, I mean, Ralph can more perfectly talk about the SQL data warehouse, or now Azure Synapse, for example, where you see how this is evolving. Yeah, so they definitely try to interface onto a very good pattern, like splitting storage and computation and things like that. And in this kind of scenario and this kind of data warehouse, you also see this, as I mentioned, BigQuery, for example, on Google side is following the same principle, and I'm now, due to the long work day, forgetting how the AWS services, but they for sure have a same service, yeah. But yeah, as mentioned, these things are getting now more popular, and you also see that the data lake is also getting a little bit back into the backbone to the use case that it was intentionally sought after. If you see the rise of Snowflake DB and so on, yeah, for example. But maybe some of our colleagues have some experience more, for example, with SQL data warehouse or Azure Synapse and so on.
So I think there are actually two questions hidden in that question, actually. So, or two sides. So the one is, so what you touched a lot. So what's the technical future of the data warehouse? So where will it be evolving to, Azure Synapse and so on? But then there's also like data warehouse is like also like a concept. It's not only the technical stuff, but it's like one big data lake, one big data platform where you have a nice business data model, preferably in SQL, and you can query on that. And so I think also there, at least what I'm seeing is that people are trying to move away, or it's like people think it's old stuff. They don't want to build up a data warehouse, but then there comes up the talk about the single source of truth, and we wanna have a data catalog, and then they don't call it data warehouse. We do data marts, and so people are more and more reluctant to say, oh, let's build up a data warehouse. But a data warehouse is actually a good thing. So I need a place when a business guy comes to me and asks me, oh, I just wanna query the data of the last month. I don't want to send him to a data lake and tell him to do Spark jobs. I don't want to send him to any production grade database. I want a place. I want to hand him a connection string. I want to tell him, if you know SQL, you can go there and write your queries. And if you hit enter and it takes an hour, nobody cares. And so I think there will be, it is currently evolving. Probably what it looks like, the name will change, but the concept, it's very, very charming to have that place where it's just my very downstream data where I can send all my business guys to.
And I think we must not forget that there's still a lot of standardized reporting that has to take place. So it's not all about analytics. It's a lot of standard reports that we're producing every month, for example. And I think therefore a data warehouse can be quite useful.
And also one thing that the people are often forgetting, one big role, especially in big companies, the data warehouse has, is that it's historizing the data. You don't want to do that anywhere where you need performance or real time. You want to have a separate place for that. This will produce huge amounts of data, and you don't want to replicate that twice or three times if you make one record every day. it's just.
I think where this topic also comes into when you want to set the data warehouse in comparison to the data lake is also the governance, right? So normally in the definition of a data lake, you don't really have kind of a governance in the definition of it. So you have free data rolling around and stuff like this, and you have a straight structure in a data warehouse. Maybe this is also why the data lake wasn't really a replacement for the old way of doing data warehouses, right?
Well, I would also tend to say there is still from a business perspective there's still a huge need for data warehouses. Yeah, from a technical perspective, I think it's progressing or evolving as you already said into a more easy approach to get it up and running and keep operations easier, like data warehouse as a service. Yeah, and you mentioned some of those in the hyperscalers which are already there. But at the end, Peter mentioned it. What is the purpose? No? The purpose of a data warehouse typically have been there is a place where I can go, and in that case, I grab and find my data. Yeah, best case. And the thing where data warehouses are, from my perspective, are looking a little bit old-fashioned is because the amount of data sources or data places are now moving so fast between these hybrid architectures. Yeah, because in the past you had to have your data warehouse, you had to have your SQL/Oracle/ whatever cluster, and most of the things you had in data have been stored there, and everything's fine. Yeah. Now, through the microservice architectures, there is something in a cloud storage. There is some SaaS. There is a lot of platform services which are acting differently. And so, from my end, I would say there is still the need for having a unified architecture, which provides me, on the one hand side, with services and technologies to get those information out.
Of course, yeah.
So the question is it more like a data warehouse in the past, or is it more a kind of data fabric approach, which is a kind of API layer over the entire enterprise continuum? Yeah. And provide me unified API governance security structures to have the same way of processing data, getting data in and out, and so on. Yeah, I think that's more or less the question here. In the future of data warehouses, technically it's getting easier. From a business perspective, it's getting more complex because there are more data sources out. But I'm pretty sure, Albert, you have seen a lot more data warehouses than myself.
Yes, a lot of more, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's.
Yeah.
Oh,
Please,
yeah, I think when it's come to AI, I would just like to give it the voice to you because it's an interesting topic. What is better, a data lake or a data warehouse for you, actually, for your data science guys?
From a data science perspective, I say there is no clear answer on that, because from a data science perspective, the overlaying question is, what does the organization want to achieve with the data science? Where is the value in? Yeah, and if it's kind of the main focus is on risk management and processing structured data with, let's say, more or less classical AI or standardized advanced analytics, then a data warehouse and so to say fits the job, and if there is no real-time component in it, from a data science perspective, I don't that there is not much difference in how the data are streamed there. But if you're going in, let's say what a lot of organizations are talking about, kind of really event streaming and real-time processing and so on, then the data warehouse comes, at least from my perspective, fast to its limits.
That's right, yeah. But I think the issue here is with where data lake versus data warehouse is always the structure, right? Because you have to do mostly a lot of cleaning and stuff like this, or data engineering in the data lake, where you have a clearer structure in the data warehouse. And maybe this will bring us to our next topic. Is a data fabric the new thing? Because as my researchers, I found it come across the data fabric with Ralph and Peter actually last time. It was a good evening with a lot of good discussions. And data fabric should be something like this governance topic when it comes to cloud, hybrid clouds, multi-cloud infrastructures and architectures, where you have a clear governance through it all. It should also include the topic data mesh and stuff like this. But is it really a new thing, or is it just governance in the cloud? Change my mind, please.
Yeah, I'm not going to change your mind, and yeah, it has been a very nice evening. It started as a 10-minute call and ended up in 3 hours of playing around with facts and figures. At the end, the beauty of data fabrics, or when we're discussing data mesh versus data lake, I would say a data fabric is somehow an interim step to a data mesh. Yeah, and I would say the biggest, let's call it, challenge for organizations to have a good data fabric is to have a consistent data model, because that's the difference between the data warehouse and a data fabric. You need to have a kind of enterprise data model as well, and then you have this beauty, yeah, of not only governance and included security. You also have the chance to value each data source different, yeah, like having some kind of IoT data which are super fresh and cent per second of each sensor, yeah, and you do have some data coming out of a POS environment which is 3 days old. Yeah, so also putting some metadata around it and giving the consumer the chance to understand the freshness, also how trustworthy a source is, etc. pp. Yeah, so all these nice little things, which gives at the end the consumer more freedom to let's say adapt its behavior on runtime. Yeah, that's the beauty here. But on the other hand side, when we're talking about data fabric, simply spoken, it's an API array where you have some kind of middleware in between, which is harmonizing the access to all of your different data sources. Yeah. So from my understanding, it's a beautiful approach, especially in hybrid architectures. Public cloud versus and local data centers, and there will be a huge need for having a good enterprise data model as well. Otherwise, you will not be successful there. But yes, it's a step on the journey.
I've seen some approaches that are currently going on, like this OSPDF platforms or something like that, where you have kind of how should a data fabric look like, or how this general infrastructure should look like with knowledge graphs and stuff like this to get all these fields, because if you combine everything together, you end up with a big mess, right?
The problem is the devil in this topic is really in the detail, because when you combine the technical components, yeah, in an enterprise environment, and all the different ways of integrating them and putting those data together, yeah, you can end up in a huge mess, as you mentioned, yeah. That's the thing. It's a complex topic, but the beauty in cloud computing is that most of the components you're using and most of the platform services you're using has already predefined or pre-configured connectors and integration ways of integration, and that could be here the helpful path. Huh?
Oh, when it comes to this topic like data fabric and so on, Patrick, what's your opinion about this data fabric? Because you are also working with a lot of on-premise data and also in the cloud now. Would be this something that fits your need and would be a solution for you?
I could think of it being a solution. What I would like to add, because you mentioned governance before, the advantage, but also the problem of the data warehouse is that practically, normally the data teams have a lot of knowledge about the data that is in there, quite often more than the business departments that are generating that data, or even the ones that use it. And that's something that completely changes when we're going towards a data lake environment, or something where that kind of governance cannot be done by the central data team. So I think it's really important there that the organization has the people that can deal with an environment like that, and take the lead into that data governance there, more from the business perspective than just from the data team perspective.
Yeah, that sounds good. It's kind of hard topic, right? Because if you look at the stuff like how you implement the fabric across your whole infrastructure that you currently have, that's, I think, if we're coming to this topic like this, it's always a combination of modern microservice pattern stuff that always get an attachment to data, and we're combining all the things we did there, like for instance, service mesh, data mesh, microservices there, and here we have data domains and stuff like this. It's always a combination of all these topics together in the data field. So it's not really a separate discussion mostly. So if you want to create something new in this field, you always need to combine everything that's currently going on.
And also, so when talking about these maybe data fabric or data mesh, I think a lot of pitfalls that are in there are the same as for microservice structures. And if you look out there, there are not many big, good working microservice structures that come from companies that didn't grow up with this and that didn't build up the structure from ground on. And there's a simple good reason for that. It's not easy to do good scalable microservices, and it's also not a coincidence that a lot of really good test automation frameworks and stuff like contract-driven development, which is really heavily governance focused, actually, is coming from people who are doing microservices. Because it's not like, oh, I'm doing microservices, so I need less governance and I just keep spinning up small services. It's, oh, I'm doing microservices, I need a lot more governance so everybody can rely on each other's services. And so what we will come to see is if it's even more difficult to do this kind of pattern if you're really dealing only with data, because in interfaces you very often get along with to have a rough understanding of the same fields. So it's okay if each services has its own take on the same field, as long as it's roughly the same content. In data, it's so if you really think about the data integration, so if you copy this amongst multiple nodes, I think you really have to have good governance and good data quality checks or also maybe not really checks, but a good understanding of what data do you get, so that the data that you produce is not rubbish and that it's explainable. So I think data mesh will need a whole nother set of governance tools to really be scalable in the long run.
Cool. Yeah. Does somebody else have something to say to this topic, or should we switch the question? Seems like No. Cool. Yeah. So we all talk about data fabrics, data warehouses, data mesh, data lakes, and stuff like this. So when it comes to all of these topics, there's one topic we always keep in mind: that's storage, right? So every data needs to be stored somewhere, and this brings us to the next question. So the future of data storage, right? Is it on premise? Is it in the cloud? I mean, the question is pretty clear in some cases, but not in everyone. I mean, the perfect question for Ralph, I guess, because
Absolutely. So the answer is always cloud, but the reality looks a little bit different because the enterprise continuum, at least depending on regulatory topics and also having the security or having the trust also to opt out of a service and having control, etc. Yeah, is in an enterprise context, it's hybrid by default, I would say so. Yeah. But as you see, the growth rates on cloud storage and the growth rate on cloud-based offerings, also the consumption, especially in Middle Europe, like Austria, Germany, Switzerland, is growing fast. So I think the answer is quite clear. There is a huge demand on cloud, but especially enterprises for the next 3 to 5 years will be hybrid by default. Sorry, that's the answer.
of course, yeah, that's a good answer. So, any opinion to this topic?
Yeah, I think you also have to consider there are some regulatory limitations to that, especially, I mean, and this is not an EU thing, by the way. Yeah, you see this in Switzerland as well, and some of the countries like China or Russia or other markets, they even have way more stricter laws on that. Yeah, so data cannot leave these countries, and if you don't have a cloud provider in that country, so Switzerland, for example, is there a quite good one because you don't have from all three big hyperscaler a data center there. Yeah. And especially not all services available. So you see there is this regulatory part to it. Also, the question is, you also have to define, I mean, to bring huge amount of data into the cloud is still a challenge. Yeah. So for example, if you should really look on this on the AWS side. They have a nice video on about this. For example, if you want to transform to the cloud, they send you a big box of like hard disks, just hard disks in a very compound shell, and they say, okay, we just stream all your data to this, and then basically then a truck comes or they send it via UPS, and then it's get the transfer like that. So this is still a huge problem, especially if large amounts of data. Yeah, and you shouldn't underestimate this. Yeah. So for example, in telco in Austria, they have like so-called charging data records. And this is about 80 to 90 terabytes a month. This is just charging data records. This is just simple records that tell you have been in this cell of the network and have consumed, I don't know, 10 kilobits of data from this and this address, for example, or you have called SY these people and or have sent an SMS and things like that. Yeah. So it's getting quite huge, and that's why you still have the cases of on-premise. Yeah. But on the other hand side, you have the beauty of like, I mean, who's ever have used like a Google Cloud Storage or an S3 bucket on Amazon knows how easy it is to deal with this data and how versatile it is, and that there are APIs to utilize this data and so on. And it's quite more easy than, so storage shouldn't be limited to like simple file storage as it has been in the past. Yeah. But
yeah. I mean, also the cloud enables you a lot of playground, as we mentioned before, right? Where you can easily get to topics like AI, data science, and so on, because mostly on-premise hardware and software components, you're limited to the stack you have in your company. And to spin up a service, right, it's pretty easy. In there, you can just try it out. You can get a subscription for free and some voucher, and you can just build up your stuff there, right? But when it comes to data, it's always a very important thing to keep in mind, that security and safety of it. So you cannot really do it on a free tier. So, Albert, how do you handle in your group the topic with secure data? Because the issue is mostly that you have the data, but you need to kind of anonymize it to use it in the free tier, for instance. It's very hard.
Before coming to your question, two additional points. I think, from my point of view, the question shown here is a bit too generalistic, yeah, because the last year showed us all that a full on-premise version is gone for, I would presume, 99.9% of the companies, even if they are not accepting that thing. Yeah, but at least a small, tiny part, might it be something in your office suite or wherever, is in the cloud. So a full on-premise organization, I don't see even yet. Yeah? We're not talking about the future. It's even now hard. And also on the other side, if you say, as also Philip mentioned, 100% in the cloud will be for foreseeable future. If you're kind of an established company, I don't see it yet, also not from a technological point, but there are a reason, like some Philip mentioned, and other things. So on this answer, it's just the only possible answer, a hybrid system. You have to go one layer deeper to say, okay, what I'm talking really, if I mean the future of data storage is on-premise or cloud, yeah? Do I talk about the office data, or do I talk about chat data, or transaction data, or whatever, yeah? So this on the one side. And what you said, you have to see that, especially when talking about AI, we will see next year a new AI regulation. So in April this year, the EU AI Regulation Act was drafted and went to the parliamentary process. And for a private person, for sure, it's easy to mount and work around with whatever services are there. But depending on what is finally agreed, that will not be so easy from a regulatory point of view in the future within the EU. Yeah, because there are some regulation. What do you have to do when you have to classify what for you are using your AI? And here also, just from a risk perspective, an organization does not want to have the freedom of every data science in its organization to mount uncontrolled and unmonitored or unrestricted services and performing there some AI pre-trained models or transfer learning or whatever. Yeah. So this I think this is important to have in mind. And your question here was for sure, it sounds easy on the one side, yeah, but I see here two points. The one, and this is you can have in the cloud also, is really the freedom of the open source stacks and always comparing. If you're really on the cutting edge data science, what is not off the shell? Yeah, if you just take the off the shell models and versions which are implemented, all fine and good. And this on the other side, there might be some differences if you want to go further. This is always easy, but the other thing is to get the data there, and there we are in the core topic also of this talk. Yeah, then you have your instance, your tenant, you have your modules, your whatever you want in the cloud, but how do you get the data there in a fast way if it's not stored yet in a cloud version from an organization perspective?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to regulation, there's also some issues currently going on with this Cloud Act, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very hard to say how this will end up in the next years, I think. If there's a solution, please date me up. But it seems like there's still some discussions going on how the European government will act in this situation, how it will be implemented and stuff like this, because you can bring your own key and encrypt the stuff in the cloud, because it's still like infrastructures and services also possible, right? But for the big three, will be this huge discussion point, right?
There's one hypothetical easy answer. to the cloud discussion and one easy solution, but it's kind of an unrealistic one. It's that the EU is building kind of an cloud Airbus system where we invest and build an European hyperscaler with data centers in every European country, European Union country.
The SAP cloud.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a cool point, right? It's the thing is what I'm also interested in the future. I mean, we have these big three companies here, or big four if you also want to take the Asian market with Alibaba Cloud and stuff like this. But there are also some small providers here. We have digital, not small providers, also big in their field, like DigitalOcean, for instance, Scaleway. In Austria, we have, I think, Well4You and EasyName, stuff like this. They're pretty small in comparison to DigitalOcean and stuff like this, where you can host container stuff, like, for instance, Docker images and stuff like this. Will be there an opportunity for them to get in the headlight of this whole cloud topic? That's the thing what I'm interested in, because if you can build software as a service products according to a standard so that every cloud provider could use it, it would be easier for also smaller companies that are not that big, like Microsoft, AWS, or Google, to tame the market in the future, because as it seems most people are going to this big three and think they are the only solution currently, right? But I think, please, yeah.
One thing about that, I think we need to understand when we're talking about cloud or any kind of managed service providers, yeah, we should understand that for instance, AWS stated in its 2020, 2019 yearly report that they launched 2,000 plus new features, 2,000 plus. Microsoft stated in the same year 1,500 plus new features and functionalities. Yeah, so this enormous boost of new capabilities, yeah, brings a lot of pressure to all of the others who are not in the same speed, like Google, like the Macs, yeah, Microsoft, Amazon, Alibaba, and Google. The second thing we need to understand is that most of the cloud providers, or these four cloud providers, are more or less buying around about 55 to 60% of the entire hardware production a year. So those companies are really buying nearly everything which is on the field. Yeah, it's a $1 billion bet. Yeah, and fact number 3 is most of those four are producing already their own custom hardware which fits the best to their software. Yeah, and I'm not only talking about TensorFlow here. Yeah, so the question about how to compete with those four, yeah, for smaller ones, is really about a very limited field of having some kind of very specialized sector-related solution, or at least if really the European countries or the European Union is getting some regulatory on this topic, which I do not hope, because as all of you know, in the projects we are working about the last 20 months, public cloud gives us a huge boost in flexibility, scalability, also the time to market. That's incredible when you compare this to 20 years ago. What I do see, to be honest, is a scenario which could look like the Department of Defense in the United States. So those guys just bought, yeah, a Microsoft and also an Amazon owned or operated data center, which is separated from the rest of the cloud world, and it's only for them. They just put, I think, around about $10 billion in that case. But if you're using such a scenario, for instance, for government use cases, or also for public health data, that could be also a scenario here in Europe for countries, yeah, to speed up.
I also think one of the big advantages of the big clouds is that they allow you to do your business globally and expand all over the world, which will probably be quite difficult for smaller companies to provide.
What I think is that so currently it's, so let's say the global distribution is really the only key feature of the big players that you can't replicate on premise with equal byproducts just in another way. But I think that will change very soon. So if you look at really new technologies like quantum computing or stuff like that, these are such new things that the first thing there will be probably a quantum computing cloud service, because they have the manpower and the size that they can operate such a thing. But that's a technology where just nobody can say, oh, I don't like the cloud, so I buy a quantum computer and put it in my basement. So you need a physics lab to run these things. So, and I think that's what will happen, that if you're not in one of these big players, you just won't have these cutting edge technologies available to you anymore, because they're just so niche probably, and so heavy to operate that there's no way to get access to them.
Yeah, the thing is, I think the better question here, instead of the future of data storage, is there also a place for this kind of middle class providers in the next 20 years? Because I think, as you mentioned, they are buying and they're building the big three, and it seems like, I mean, there will be some space always for kind of some products there, but I think they will be reduced by the years, right? It's because it's getting cheaper and cheaper in the cloud. There's a race between this big four players here, and they're taming every market. And as you mentioned, also the features here. I worked kind of a time now with the cloud, and it seems not every feature is a hit, right? So you have these approaches from AWS and Microsoft, and if we come to products like Logic App from Microsoft, and you see how fast they really are and how they really work. It's the same with AWS in some cases, and there are a lot of YouTube videos as well for this, where you can see how bad some scalability tools are really working. There's another approach from Google where you have less features but better components. And if you compare Firebase products to Microsoft products, you see you don't have that much feature, but the products are really working. There are a lot of good features like web apps and stuff like this, but if you want to combine stuff like with Docker images instead of this normal hosting, it's always a discussion which one is the better one.
Well, Peter, please go ahead.
Yeah. So, but I think there's also one issue with the big clouds. So nobody is talking about, because everybody, when building software and buying software, everybody is talking about vendor login, and you want to avoid vendor login. And now with new software, it's actually pretty easy. You just use Kubernetes or Docker, and you are pretty agnostic to any to any cloud, to any platform, and you move. You think you can move as you want, but as we just heard, somewhere is your data, and moving data, you can spin up the same database in another cloud, but moving data is expensive and it's a pain in the ass. So probably the future slogan won't be anymore "your home is where your heart is," but "your home is where your data is." And I mean, nobody is so it's that big. It's too big to fail. Is not there anymore. Each of these cloud providers are just one really serious zero-day bug away from being out of business, and then you're stuck on one of these platforms with your data.
Well, what I can say from now around about 10 years working on cloud transformation projects, data means gravity.
That's good.
That's the thing at the end, So your data is always your gravity center of your IT, and even if people like myself or others tell you it's easy to take a service and transform it to somewhere else, you easily find a thing which is always a pain in the ass, that is called dependency, and most of the times you really need to move those services and the data in its logical dependency together. Otherwise, you will fail. And then we're coming more and more back to the original question of today. Is there anything else working like a domain-driven approach? And I would say for the next years, no.
Yes. I mean, if you look at the companies, how they build up a domain-driven system is the thing they need, right? It's always like if you're discussing stuff like big data and so on, and we've done this a lot of times with the customer. It starts with, oh, I've seen big data in the news. We should do big data, and I mean, so it's starting always like that. And one time I was talking with some infrastructure guys, and they said, yeah, we set up some Cloudera stack here, and now we're doing something with data, right? And that was the first try. After a couple of years, they get into it what it is and how they design it, but they still have this issue that they don't really have defined how they will do big data. I mean, just to dump data and call it big data is not the way you should do it. And I think we've discussed this in the first talk of this meetup. Uh, let's talk about big data, right? How it's done, right? It's very interesting how different companies handle the topic of data.
We had to learn that the hard way as well. We also set up a Hadoop cluster and put data on it, and then we found out that nobody had any ideas what they wanted to do with that data, and then you actually end up paying for something that nobody uses, and then it was gone again, and you start all over. So yeah, I know it quite well.
Well, the good news in having your own Hadoop cluster is that you already have paid it once. But no, I don't want to joke about capex, yeah. But one thing on data which I would like to add here, I've seen a lot of companies not only struggling on what you said, Patrick, because that's a very common situation. There is a kind of decision, we want to do it, we go the invest and build the enabling infrastructure, yeah. But then all the supporting tools you need to make data engineering, you need a data bench, you need tools for engineering, you need tools for dashboarding, you need, and then all these things are getting really complicated for an IT organization, even for huge IT organization in enterprise companies like for instance, the finance sector, yeah, banks and insurers, yeah, they have typically a lot of people are only working on IT. Even for them, it's hard to procure the right stuff, to integrate the right tools, to get this entire stack up and running, yeah. And that's at the end something I always coming back from my cloud focus. That's a huge benefit of public cloud these days. You have these integrated stacks, you have these integrated tool chains. If it's not working, you're not going to pay it by next month anymore. And that makes it way easier and reduces the risk for organizations a lot.
Yeah. And also for the problem or the disadvantage of things like Hadoop clusters is the Hadoop cluster is not one service, right? So you get thrown on your bench a tool set of really highly specified and specialized tools that work for one specific use case and for one only. So if you don't have an expert who knows exactly which tools to pick for which use case, you don't get any value out of it. But if you run a real-time use case on Hive, you have a good but very slow real-time use case. Yeah. So and with the cloud, you at least so you have you're one abstraction level higher, right? So you also have like a very specified tool set, but it tells you for which task the tool set is. So you have functions, and functions are small things, but you don't care about. So you don't just get a framework that is called Spark, and you have to figure out yourself that this is for streaming.
Yeah, that's the point, and also that's not the thing of Cloudera to teach you how the tools work. They're just giving you a stack. to do it, right? I mean,
Yeah, but
you are able to do it, but you also need the hardware. If you want to just try it, it's pretty hard, but you have at least everything in one box where you can choose which kind of block you need and you want, and you can build your own Lego tower, for instance. But it's very hard to build it up from the Caldera stick. So, Albert, you need to leave?
Yeah, I have to leave. Wish you a nice talk for the remaining half hour. And I think it's the topic of the future, how we deal with our data and so on. Yeah. So have a nice talk. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. So, again, the 5 people who started with. Yeah, I mean, we already discussed all the questions of this evening, so we can also quit a bit earlier. But I think what is
I would have a new question that actually it's a little bit a provocative one, but we talked now a lot about domain-driven design. Did any of us see any company that really does domain-driven design well, and how it's defined in the books?
Well, let me answer this. I can say no, at least from my end. I think there are a lot of guys in the field who really knows about the advantages, or at least, let's see, the dreams which are connected to the big picture. Yeah, but at the end, it's not easy for a traditional organization to switch. Yeah. The architecture model to a full domain-driven architecture. What I do see, to be honest, is organizations who have been founded 100% out of a digital business case or business model, who are really running this. Yeah. So especially when we're talking about things which are always a fun to work, like finance industries or banking, it's known for high speed, agility, and a lot of innovation. Sarcasm off. Those organizations, most of them know, yeah, or knew in the past that they need to make it different, and therefore a lot of organizations founded some 100% digital sub companies of them, yeah, to build a whole suite of full digital products and follow then also with these kind of architectures and services. And in that cases, it's way more way closer to that. As always, when you're doing work not only in a university, you're doing it in the field, there is a difference between real life and the books. Yeah, but I think that's more or less one of the cases why it's so hard for traditional organizations to speed up in this architecture mode.
Also, what I think is, so if you really want to do domain-driven design, it's not a way of doing data, it's a way to structure your business, right?
Yeah, I mean, this question, who did domain-driven design in the right way, is the same like who is really agile, right? Because if you want
now we're getting philosophy.
yeah, but if you want really to move your company to the next steps, you also need this agile work, right? Because if you're stuck in old structures, how you want to implement it?
I mean, you always have to be careful. Yeah, I mean, these are all the concepts. They're looking really nice on paper. Yeah, this is always, but in the real world, this is not always black and white. Yeah, it's unfortunate like this. And I mean, to get now really philosophical in the end, yeah, nobody likes to change. Yeah, like even we at a certain point don't like to change some of our habits, or maybe our goals, and maybe our assumptions that we have grown up about the past. So yeah, it's quite hard. I mean, what I can see is, well, what a lot of companies who think they are doing domain-driven design, and they think they have a proper enterprise architecture and design. Most of them, they don't have it. Yeah, they have, like, especially we have a bad saying, this PowerPoint architects, or the architects who never built any software since 15 years, that tell you about all of the nice concepts and so on. Yeah, this is then really a warning sign, and you have to be really careful.
Well, but I'm sorry for jumping in, Rafael. I think
worries.
there's another thing which we need to take in consideration. Yeah. I think one of the biggest lies in IT I meet on a daily basis is a so-called greenfield approach. I think all of you already heard about it. There is a kind of new workload or new solution which need to be built up, and we agree this is a greenfield approach. Yeah, and when you walk through Vienna or the city of Milan, no architect who is not an IT architect who is building houses would ever come to the idea building a house in Milan is a greenfield approach. Yeah, because there's always a surrounding, there's always dependencies, there's always stuff you have around, and that's the thing here as well. And that's what Patrick and Philip said. I would say so. As long as you have some kind of a state which is there, yeah, you need to take care of it. Maybe you can transform it faster. Maybe you can cut off old habits with more speed, but especially in the interim time, there's still a good cause where these systems are there, because otherwise they would be shut off, yeah, or shut down. And I would say that's one of the problems why this kind of domain-driven architecture, which also affects organizational structures a lot, is not in place. And the second thing, which comes now with all those digital campus and digital factories within the organizations, is a clear understanding that IT is really affecting the way we are working. It's really changing processes. It's really changing the way how you are interacting with your customers and your partners in a B2X scenarios. And that takes some time to get those paper-based way of thinking and processing out of the minds. Yeah. And my favorite topic has been the education field last year. I have 2 children at home. Both are going to different schools, and when you're not allowed to go to school, then you see how many processes are heavily dependent on having a sheet of paper.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, the classic blueprints, right?
Take all those lawyers who knows how to build and stamp things, because we always done it. Yeah, these are things that's not going away by just being smart. Yeah, it's
of course
always leading by example.
I mean, in my opinion, it's very important to combine the knowledge of experienced colleagues and new colleagues. So you always take the new approaches to the old colleagues and discuss them. Just discussing is the most important thing, because I know young people like me are mostly here to fail, right? And to challenge the old stack. And if you want to discuss it with an old colleague, it's always nice, because if we talk about it, mostly he can tell me why it would fail because they did it in the past, or they have another approach. So in some cases you have some new innovation and you have a point maybe as a young person there, and then you can also establish a change. But you need just to combine the resources for old colleagues and young peoples and just keep the discussion going, because it's not a good way that one person decides everything. Like in some companies, you see that there is the one guy, he is an enterprise architect for 20 years, and he is the only guy who decide and make decision. And that's not the way how it should be. It should be kind of a team with some young people, some old people, and with combined powers, they will get to the results they want to achieve, right? That's what I think.
Damn! Now you're bringing me into a situation that I'm feeling old because I'm answering. No, I would tend to say 2 things or 3 things, and now we are really getting into the So success is always a team effort. Yeah. And there is no old and young. Yeah, there's always a kind of joint work, which in best case supplement each other. It's a lot about diversity, especially in the teams, and that's not about gender. It's about how you see the world, how you experience things, how you consume stuff, and approach things from a let's say methodological perspective. Yeah, so I think diversity is a key factor for success, and having a team which is working together for a good reason and a good purpose. Yeah, that's a good thing. The second thing is we are in the unlucky situation, and that's especially to me because I'm now for 40 years plus. Yeah, and 50 years ago, yeah, I would be in the situation that I do have my personal assistant, and I'm in the bright age of my work life, and a lot of young guys like you have to deal with what I think is right, and you don't know what is wrong. This is especially in IT not the case anymore. Yeah, we are in a sector where knowledge is created within years. Yeah, and I would not be able to give good advice to you, Raphael, or someone else to say, look, if you're spending the next 3 years on that topic, you will be top of the pops. Yeah, no chance, because it's a huge and fast progressing industry. Yeah, and therefore, I would tend to say age is not a quality sign or a quality indicator. Yeah, diversity is key, and having a culture which allows everyone to speak up and communicate and contribute to the team effort or team success on an easy basis is one of the major success factors. Otherwise, you have no chance to survive these days if you want to stay ahead of the crowd.
Of course, when it comes to experiences, I've always had that one Twitter post in mind of the Fast API guy, which is referring to a job description for Fast API, and he was just like 5 years of experience, and he's just like, I'm sorry, I don't have this experience because I built it for 3 years. That's a good part here. Yeah.
So also, I think, so what we are currently more and more learning, there is no such thing as the best or the correct architecture. So I think if you would take the architecture of Uber, Google, of any of the big players who really have good technical architects, copy it one-to-one and slap it on any company, you will end up probably with a mediocre architecture, because it's just there is an architecture that fits to you, and there's architecture that fits to your company, to your work style, to your developers, and not the correct architecture. So I think the role of the architect is more to lead and to give a direction, but not to say this is right and this is wrong. Because in the end, there's a lot of ways to do stuff the right way. If you have the people and the structure to support it, you can really do a lot of stuff in a lot of different ways, especially when it comes to data.
That's the point where we started today, right? So maybe for this evening, let's say I want to say thank you to all the speakers and listeners, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this time the recording actually worked. So it's a technical hard topic. Yeah, so thank you for joining today, and I hope you will be there for the next meetup. The next is planned in August, where the head developer and chief architect, I think, and team lead as well. You know, there are a lot of roles for one person. Of Bugs will introduce us to their software architecture. Will be an interesting talk of him. and the current day is not sophisticated, but we will post it in the future, in the near future. So thank you and bye.